Hey, Sheldon, welcome to the podcast. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So, hi, everybody. My name is Sheldon Jones. Pleasure to be here. Super excited. Hopefully, you guys can take at least one nugget away of knowledge from this.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your background? I know that you've worked on and off somewhat in the auto space. Can you kind of tell me where you're working now, some of the projects that you're working on, and how you've gotten there?
Absolutely. So, I'll just go in kind of chronological order back from when I was younger. And some of this is not going to pertain to automotive, but it's kind of all led to the path of automotive. So, I went to college when fresh out of high school, started to see like I could take more risks when I was younger. Worst case scenario, I end up having to move back in with my mom. Not a high risk, right? So bought my first rental when I was 19, flipped that, ended up buying a little smoothie shop in Colorado called Squeeze Fresh Smoothies. I then had to work outside of the business so I could show that it could grow without an owner being present. So everybody kept telling me, dude, go sell cars. You're going to do really good things. It's easy for you to talk to people. So I went in selling cars. My first 7 or 8 months, I made $100,000 selling cars. It was phenomenal. I loved it as a young kid. I'm 21, 22 at this time, making more money than a young person should. And then I started seeing, I didn't think that was very viable to just be a car salesman. The hours were terrible. The opportunity cost when you weren't there for my mental health. If I would take a day off, I'm just constantly checking, but we'll get into that later. I went into management there, bounced around from a couple different stores within that dealership group. Really did not like my quality of life. So I decided to take a huge pay cut and go over to the wholesale side where it was like a Monday through Friday, but a lot less money. Moved up to Seattle to be an AGM at a smaller auction, worked my way up. Currently, I'm at Odessa Auto Auction after a year hiatus from the automotive industry at Dish Network so I could let my non-compete expire. I was also a little worried about my industry being a little bit too specific to automotive and that not translating to anything outside of it if I ever wanted to jump outside of it. And I realized I'm really good at automotive, so I wanted to get back in. So been with Odessa for 2.5, almost 3 years now as the GM of Little Rock.
You mentioned you were a Dish Network for a year to allow your non-compete to expire. How did your work at Dish kind of translate into the work that you're doing now and your overall kind of growth?
The thing that Dish taught me more than anything else was how to juggle so many things at one time. I had 560 indirect reports at Dish Network, and you're just constantly juggling things. And every single day, you're going to let some things fall. And you just have to make sure those things are plastic and not glass. And those change every single day, is the best analogy I can use for that. And they run you into the ground and they run their employees into the ground. Like our attrition rate for the people that I managed, the goal was 100%. So our goal was to turn over an entire staff in 1 year. Like that's considered exceptional.
That's mind-blowing to me to think that your attrition rate would be 100%. I would assume that most organizations would really struggle if it was 20.
Their goal to hire is we're going to hire them before anybody else. And that's why they're going to get this job. And I was able to lower the attrition rate for my region down below 50%. And everybody from corporate came and was like, what are you doing differently? And I don't think I was doing anything besides having a personal touch, right? Like I want to get to know somebody besides just the metrics and numbers. So I like I like to talk to people, much like what you do, right? Talking to strangers, getting to know their life story. I like to do that. And if I have the capacity of 560 employees, why would I not want to talk to them, learn a little bit more about their life, learn what motivates them and what their end goals are? I think that, the intangibles of being a manager with that go really, really far. So that's what I did. And I think that kind of went a long way when somebody's looking to potentially leave. There's a lot of intangibles that they don't necessarily think of when it's just a monetary decision, but those have to come into factor. And if you build those intangibles up, they will have an ROI.
Having a personal relationship with the people that you work with, understanding what motivates them, allows them to it allows you to push them to grow within themselves. It allows you to coach them up more and see where their potentials are, and then maybe steer them towards that versus, hey, you keep hitting this roadblock, maybe try something different. You're actually able there to coach them up and help them through something like that.
Absolutely.
So one other thing that I noticed is that you had also gone back to school to get an advanced degree after being an established professional. What was that process like for you? I mean, I did something very similar. COVID hit, and I decided to go back and get my MBA. But I wanted to. This is a shared experience for us, so I'm curious how it was for you versus how it was for me.
Yeah, so I took a little bit of a risk and I left a really good job during election year and in the height of COVID, right? I got you won't see it on my LinkedIn because it was such a short stint. So I had a not immediate family, but they kind of courted me for a year and a half to come take over their company. And I was already planning to do my MBA, but I wanted to do in person, right? I was really thinking I hit the max of what I could hit. I don't think I was going to accelerate in my upward mobility within corporate if I did not use something that could catapult me a couple steps above. So the MBA was the goal for that. Well, I moved out, and within 2 weeks, this family company that said I was going to get ownership of this, they ended up firing me because there's all these lawsuits and they were going to shut down the company. So I just quit my job. I'm in the middle of COVID, election year, not a lot of six-figure jobs that people are just throwing around. So I had to change my plans, still wanted to get that degree, but I decided to go part-time at Kelley School of Business online compared to just going in person because I stopped studying for the GMAT. I didn't take it. They didn't require you to do it. And then that's when I went into Dish Network to kind of let my non-compete expire for me to go back into the automotive space. I think that I met a lot of amazing people there. So my goal was I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my MBA. It wasn't going to necessarily advance me in the automotive career, but I also wanted to amortize that over 35 working years left compared to what's going to be the quick ROI. And I know rather than doing it in 10 years when I have more responsibility, I'd rather not regret it later on and get it now. I met some amazing people. I don't think I got the same experience as a lot of people because I wasn't going in with a specific intent. So for me, I got good grades, but I also did very minimal effort to do that, right? So I didn't attend every class. I didn't do everything that I could have to get the ROI and get the experience. Mine was just like, I'm going to get the piece of paper. Like they would have just said, pay me the money to get a piece of paper. I probably would have just gone that route. So for me, I would not advise for it. And especially with kind of the things that I'm going towards. Check back in 10 years and I may change my opinion on that. But as of right now, I would say that you're paying for a good alumni network.
Yeah, I would echo that, right? Having been an established professional working at a six-figure job when I decided to go back, I also went back part-time. It was great for me to have these tools as I branch out into my own thing to understand what it is that I'm doing right and wrong. But that doesn't necessarily come from a piece of paper that I earned online and sometimes in a classroom. It was really anybody can be an entrepreneur. Anybody can have that same experience. It's just about the amount of time you spend on reflecting on the things that you've done well, things that you've done poorly, and how to do better at both.
Yeah, I think I should have listened to a couple of my mentors' advice earlier on, and everybody kind of geared me away from getting an MBA. My original idea was I potentially would pivot and go to consulting.
Mhm.
And all my mentors were like, you could survive in a big four and you'll flourish, but they're going to grind you down and you're going to be like, there's just an easier way to make that amount of money. And you're not going to want to put up with all the politics. And another mentor said, if you spent the same amount of money and just invested it in yourself, you're going to get a much better life lesson. And I would agree with that because it was very difficult for me to have a real estate investing professor who's never owned a portfolio of properties teaching me how to invest in real estate. And I'm kind of telling them, well, that's what a book says, but in real life, because I have some rentals. That's not how the real world works, but she got a
Mhm.
PhD in real estate investing. And not every teacher was like that. There were some phenomenal teachers that have had very successful businesses from the entrepreneurship world. But I just think that's a lot of what you get in academia is, especially in the collegiate level, a lot of people that know it from a book, but not real life. And real life is so vastly different than academics.
Yeah, I would agree. I had some great professors who did have experience when it came to entrepreneurship and actually running a business. They've done very well for themselves. They were very successful. But there was also ones where you're looking at the finance professor. They've never been a CPA or a CFO in an organization. They don't know what it takes. They can teach you how to do it in a book, but I'm not going to go back to them for advice if I'm trying to take my first Series A as an organization.
Absolutely. And I think that's a little bit of difference of what you get going from just a full-time NBA school where a lot of those people have less work experience compared to I had MDs, I had lawyers I had a professional NFL or former professional NFL player in my class. Just the demographics are there, but you obviously have high ranking finance guys that probably know real world finance much more than what some of the teachers do in the real world. So it's a very different experience. But I think that going part time and not sacrificing the network unless you absolutely have to go into an industry where you have to pivot, then that is the way to do it.
So let's get back on to automotive a little bit and talk through some of the trends that we've seen over let's say, the last 5 years, right? We've seen issues with supply chain. We've seen changes in consumer behaviors, especially beginning of COVID when everybody was out buying cars versus now where we're seeing much higher interest rates. How has that impacted what you've seen over the last couple of years at Odessa?
Obviously, the biggest impact of the last 5 years was COVID, right? And it had a lot of positive and a lot of negative, depending on what side of the industry you were on. Obviously, with supply and demand, basic stuff. If there's not a supply, demand is going to go up, and we saw that on the retail side. If you go talk to people on the retail side, even though they were only selling, they went from selling maybe 20 cars a month as an individual salesperson selling 10, they were making way more money. And the dealerships were making way more money because they didn't have to discount it. Cars that were typically considered C cars, where you discount to invoice, were going for over MSRP just because people were willing to overpay because they needed that. And on the wholesale side, what you saw though is it really cannibalized the business because what a typical retail automotive dealership would have sent to auction, they then decided, like at Summit Automotive, where I was, we wouldn't spend over $2,500 in recon. And if it hit over that barrier, we would just send it to wholesale. Well, when you don't have many cars coming in, you kind of have to spend more money on recon so then you can get that cost, that acquisition of the customer. So instead of spending 2,500, they might spend $5,000. So they have pre-driven vehicles on their lot. So what that kind of did is cannibalize the auction side, where dealerships that used to send 100 cars a week into the wholesale, into the auction, they decreased it to 30, 10, 15 cars.
Mhm.
And now you have new market players in there where people are able to sell their cars to a third party like Carvana, like CarMax, and not use it for trade-in. And you're seeing the conversion rate for trade-ins when somebody buys a vehicle drop significantly, down from 70 to 90%. In some dealerships or some markets, it's below, anywhere from 30 to 50%.
Been interesting, right, to hear this perspective from all over the industry. I've had similar conversations with GMs and people who run like an F&I support organization. So it's really kind of interesting how that question impacts everybody a little bit differently. Some organizations like yours, I think, has seen a much greater impact over the last 5 years than, say, the F&I company.
So Odessa specifically, we stopped running cars through our lane. And obviously, we're a large company. We had to adhere to government guidelines. So what you saw happen is a lot of the smaller players did not have to adhere to that. And they were able to really cannibalize that business and take major market shares in those markets. And people they want their cars to run live through the lane. Like that is still a hot button. when it comes to the wholesale industry. We've seen that shift in different verticals of auction, such as salvage. You don't see that, and that changed within the last 5 years. Copart was well ahead of its time within 10 years of doing digital only, but IAA, the other major player in that market, changed about 5 years ago to do. COVID sped that up. So maybe it was just a little bit less than that, but they've sped that up and they've never looked back. In the wholesale, where you have to, in whole cars, you have to have the CR grade. There's a lot of things you want to touch, feel the car.
Mhm.
And so it really hindered Odessa's business in terms of market share across the United States.
How over the last couple of years, let's just say from 2023 onward, so the last year and a half, have you seen a shift back towards normal, or are you still trying to get there?
And I guess, what are you defining normal in terms of like volume? Are you like, are we talking about the whole market? Are we talking about my specific lens through Odessa?
Let's talk your lens first, right? As far as volume and quality being the first couple of components that you should address.
Yeah, so my lens, no, it's still hard out there, right? There's still less cars in the market. There's now, you're seeing a lot of new players that you didn't see before, when it typically, the only way a dealer would get rid of their vehicles that would, wholesale vehicles, were to go to auction. Now you're seeing wholesalers, you have digital only auctions such as ACV, backlot cars. You have the independents that do outrageous things to get these customers in there. So I would say it's very difficult. And there's also just less cars circulating in the market. Those major players that used to run 100 cars a week, they're still spending more money on recon. They're still trying to get as many used cars as they possibly can. So those have still dwindled to 30 to 40 cars. I mean, they're still at 50%. And I don't think, and they don't think either, they'll ever get to that full level of wholesale because of all the other opportunities for people to get rid of their vehicles rather than trade it in.
Do you think interest rates play into this whole scheme?
I mean, they have to. Obviously, they have to, right? With the tier one credit right now, if you're is 7.5 to 8.5%, I think, unless you're doing captive financing from the floor plan, like the manufacturer, they have to impact it. You're seeing it where somebody may not be able to get as nice of a vehicle, and somebody may wait to get that vehicle. I don't have so much knowledge on the finance side, so I can't speak to that in great clarity, but it has, anytime rates are up, right? You see it in the real estate market. It makes sense that it would impact the finance market. Seen it on the dealership side for buy here, pay here's, right? Because their prime rate is up 3 times. And in some states, Arkansas being one of them, they have a usury law where they can't go above a certain percentage. So they're not making any money right now. There's very little margin for them when they typically would have a 10 to 15 point swing. Well, prime is at 8.5. That's what they're borrowing against. They can only lend out at 15. Well, that's not a good margin for somebody that's a high risk that nobody else will loan to.
In all transparency, we've done business together before. And I think that when I bought my car from you, we were borrowing at about 1%. Although that was probably, I think my wife reminded me that was probably like 9 years ago. And we still have a Subaru in the garage.
That's awesome. Love it.
So.
See? No, I mean, and Subaru, certain demographics, Toyota and Subaru, their average credit score walking in, their average demographic is like 720, right? You're not dealing like you are with different manufacturers. You go to a Nissan and they're a little bit different of a credit score. So 1%, 1.99 for that shorter term loan was very common for Subaru's in-house finance, which JP Morgan Chase. Same thing with Toyota Motor Finance. Ford, you see that different credit score, but they'll typically be very, they'll buy deep on that. But right now, that's the only, they're pretty much paying to gain that customer, right, with their low interest rate.
Yeah, I think we've seen manufacturers kind of shift, and I guess it's dealer to dealer too, that they go from just a quality to a quantity business when it comes to the number of autos that they're trying to push out every single month, whether that be new or used side.
It goes into a lot of factors of their business as well. So obviously, if they don't own the building, if they're coming up on a lease renewal, that's also in fact impacting their rent. The rent's going to go up. Everything else is going up with this. So it's not just a specific vertical in the automotive space. Those interest rates across the board kind of trickle down across everything else. But any company is going to want to see more profits year after year after year. So they kind of have to figure out a way to do that. And it's interesting to see, I remember when CarMax came into the market, everybody freaked out. Everybody, like, they're going to completely disrupt the market. They're going to change everything. We hate it, but yet they were offering good prices for pre-driven vehicles. So I would tell my customers, we can't give you that much, but go up to CarMax, get an offer, and come back down, and we'll match that, or I'll make my manager match it. Now you're seeing the same thing with Carvana come in there as like a huge market disruptor. And now Amazon is getting into the automotive industry. I don't know if you know that.
Mm-mm.
So they're in 4 markets, and I'm curious to see what their end goal is, because right now they've partnered with Hyundai. They're in 4 cities. They're only selling Hyundais. I don't think they want to get into the small profit margin of a new car. So I don't know if they're going to try to capitalize on just being the parts distributor, or if they're just going to be a lead gen, much like what TrueCar is, or anything like that. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out, or if they're just going to completely like cannibalize retail dealers, like Ford has said that they're going to do in the future. Now they're backpedaling on that and just go straight to like a Tesla model where it's B2C.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. How do you see that trend moving forward, that direct B2C versus the franchisee model? Do you think that we'll see more people adapt, more dealers adapt to the B2C model, where it's like, okay, I can essentially buy my car online without having test driven it first?
I think that you'd have to completely change the manufacturing model to do that. Not to say that won't happen, but Ford is not in the business of selling cars. They're in the business of making cars. They get paid when that car is made, and then it goes to a dealer, and that dealer has bought that car already. Whether it's on Ford's floor plan or not, most likely it is, but they've bought in that car. So then Ford is going to make a lot less money because they're going to be making less vehicles to do that. And I don't think they're in that kind of market to do that. I think that because they have footprints, right? So Groove is going to spend X amount of marketing dollars in that specific market for them to get the most cars, because Ford is not just competing with other Ford dealerships. You're competing with Chevy, you're competing with GMC, you're competing with everything else like that. So Ford would have to completely change its entire strategy. And I don't know, obviously dealerships make money, but when you're looking at it from a huge dealership, like a huge manufacturing Ford Motor Company, that's very minuscule for what they're going to do when they can capitalize on the financing and everything else that goes along with it. So while it could be the case, I don't see that happening extremely soon.
Do you think that we'll continue to see this trend of acquisition happen? With that, I mean, like these mega dealers like AutoNation. Do you think that we'll see more and more AutoNations, not necessarily AutoNation themselves, but similar competitors enter into that mega dealership space?
I do. I think you're seeing a lot of acquisitions, because I think right now that's pretty much the only way you can grow. And I think that as a small person, right, even look at Summit Automotive, which is not considered small. I think they're in the top 50 dealership group size. I think they have 37 rooftops, but they're considered fairly, medium size, we'll say. They've wanted to do rapid expansion since when I worked there. I think they've grown by like 3 stores in the last, 8 to 10 years, but it's very hard and it's very expensive to grow. So unless you have extreme financial backing and you can just kind of go take over whatever you want, it's not the best business model. And if you're looking at the multiplier for what dealerships are now going for, one of the most expensive dealerships just sold in Las Vegas, and it was a Toyota store. And I think if you take real estate out of it, it sold for over a 12x multiplier, right? So you kind of have to be looking at it. If you're not you have to be looking at it like publicly traded companies, or people that are thinking of not just 10, 15 year ROI, you're thinking of 30, 40, 50, 60 year ROI. And that's what companies like AutoNation, Lithia, and some of those ones are doing, because they're publicly traded and they think long term.
Thinking about it from that perspective, it makes sense that they would offer such a high multiplier. I mean, typically when you trade any sort of organization, you're looking at 2.5 to 5x. I mean, to do more than 10 in a market like this in automotive is incredibly high. But when you think about how long a dealership stays in business, it's typically like 50 plus years. So it's quite a long time. So to think of a 12x multiplier on a business that is potentially viable for the next 50 years makes sense to me.
Absolutely.
Let's change topics a little bit. Let's talk about some of the best and worst advice that you've gotten as a professional, or what advice would you give to yourself if you were talking to yourself 10 years ago, knowing what you know now? Like, let's talk through some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. It's one that I think, one of the questions I always ask myself is, would I want to talk to my future self or my younger self, and what would I say to them? And I think for me, I would not take advice from somebody I don't envy where they are. I think a lot of times people will seek advice from their friends, and that's fine. But if you don't envy where they are in life, and I think this goes into all verticals of life, whether it's relationship, whether it's professional, whether it's financial, right? Why on earth would I go get advice about my relationship from somebody who has a broken relationship? But yet we do these things all the time because we're seeking validation for our unconscious bias. So for me, the best thing that I would do, the best advice that I would give is just take action. Most things are not going to work, but the difference that I've seen from people that are successful, it's not intelligence, it's action. I've seen some very, very successful people that I was not impressed with, but they just took action. They just tried. Because anybody that has an idea, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, you can talk yourself out of it 100 different ways. And everybody else is going to, they don't know your risk factor. They're going to talk you out of it. But all it takes is for you to do it and it to be successful. And it may not, but if you're going to fail, fail fast. So that's some of the other best advice I got. Act quick, fail fast, and pivot.
And learning from your failure, right? Why is it that you were unsuccessful is probably the most important lesson you can learn. That way, when you're faced with a similar situation or the exact same situation, you're not falling on your face again. And this time that's on you because you didn't learn from your first time through.
100%. And my small company that I owned was half successful, half complete failure. And I learned way more from the failure aspect of it, where I will never make that mistake again. It was a very expensive lesson, but it was the best life lesson I've ever had, which set me up to be more successful, as well as manage things differently. Like the way I manage stress after that is entirely different than, which is not something you think of, but every position afterwards, they're like, oh, a lot of people burn out because this is high stressful. I think all these jobs have been easy compared to owning your own company. Like the stress is completely different. So
it's also how you manage it, right? Like having your own company when it's you and a small team or just you, like all of the burden of your success is on your shoulders. And that's one of the hardest things that I think entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs really face, is that how do you deal with that every single day and just not having the tools to be or mindset to deal with either the stresses or the failures that you face every day. Like for me, this week was just a week of conundrums. Like there was one thing after another that I did wrong or I broke. And all of it was obviously manageable to fix, but like it adds up throughout the week. And you're like, man, did I really just mess all this stuff up? And you're like, nah, I learned from it. Let's just move forward. It's all good.
One of the things that really carried me through, and I learned during that time of extreme stress, is worry about the things you can control. And there's always going to be tomorrow. And I think I was very grateful to learn that at a young age, because there's a lot of people that never learn that. So if I'm thinking about it, if it's keeping me up at night, can I solve this problem? If not, I have to get it out of my mind. And I learned that very, very young, very, very quick, which allowed me to sleep more peacefully, and I'll tackle the problems I can tomorrow.
Totally. I call that my sphere of influence, right? There's only so much that I can control or influence. If it's outside of that sphere, I can't do anything about it. I just need to let it go. On the flip side of that, what is the worst career advice you've ever gotten?
I can't think of worse. There's always been bad advice, but I think even with bad advice, you take positive things away from it. I'm very much trying to think the positive of any aspect, even if you feel like something's time wasted, because you learn a little bit more about yourself. I would think the worst advice that I've ever gotten is that because it works for somebody else, it may not work for you. And I was very much in that structured regimen of like, I was going to go to school, get good grades, go to MBA or law school, and go to a good school and work my way up the corporate ladder. But obviously my mentors could see that was not the case. But a lot of people were telling me that's how you're going to be successful. That's how you're going to be successful. And that's great for a lot of people. But clearly they saw what was true. And I don't think I would ever have been successful. I don't think I could have ever made it through law school. I would have been a good lawyer, but not a good law student, which are two very different things. I took
Mhm.
my LSAT and everything like that. So I think just because it's not how somebody else pictures it doesn't mean it's going to be successful. But I think that in when I was growing up, there was very much like a clear path to success is what people painted. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of money and a lot of success to be had in really different markets. And I've been fascinated to meet people that own dumpster companies or little things like that, or HVAC companies, and they do extremely well. And you would never have thought how much money they make or whatever you deem as success is having so much free time.
Mhm.
But that lawyers don't, they get paid $1,000 an hour.
I am way more comfortable doing what I'm doing versus what I thought was prescribed to me early on as being successful.
Everybody has a different definition of success. I think when I was 18 years old, I was so money hungry where I was like, I want to be retired by the time I'm 30. I want millions and millions of dollars. Now I look at success as time, free time, right? If I can have a good quality of life, but have free time and not be locked into a geographical location and not be locked into a 9 to 5 job, to me, that is the definition of success, and which is very attainable compared to, in my perspective, like going and making millions and millions of dollars, but then you're also chained down to whatever that is that's making those millions of dollars.
For me, I think it's the freedom to have the money to buy my time back,
Mhm.
right? And then pursue things that I think are interesting or spend time with my family or just get away, go to the mountains, go skiing, go mountain biking, whatever, and not have anybody come at me and say, "Hey, why didn't you get this thing done?" If I don't get it done, it's on me. I understand that.
Money is a renewable resource, time is not. And
Exactly.
even if you're working for somebody, one of my favorite quotes is you're still the CEO of your life. So you dictate how your life's going to go and what's going to happen from it. It's nobody else's mistake than your own. And it's if you're successful, it's your success. If you're not, it's yours. It's nobody else's. And I think that more people kind of take that accountability and ownership and see that, then they'll be happier and can kind of gear in the right direction.
I was watching a clip online yesterday, and a guy was talking about these fancy watches, and he's like, one thing that none of them have when it tells you the perfect time. There is no perfect time. You define that. So don't worry about the material things. If that's what you want in life, you've got to step up and make efforts to get there, figure out your plan, but just get started. Take that
Yeah,
action.
absolutely. And if somebody sees value, like what you might see value in to spend money in is completely different than me. And what I see to spend value in and spend money in, you'd be like, well, I would never do that. And there's
Right.
no right or wrong, right? As long as you're living within your means and you're doing that, then if somebody wants to do that, by all means. And my perspective has changed drastically, and it changes throughout time as well. Like I've become an avid traveler in the last 5 years, and that's where I want to spend. That's why I want to buy my time back, is so I can go travel, explore the world. I don't need. I've had nice cars. I felt guilty for having nice cars and having expensive payments, even though I could afford it. And now I don't need those things. It's just a different experience. I'd rather have the mobility and freedom and just kind of a lower overhead.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't think about it. Like as you grow up, as you mature, you get a higher and higher typically overhead in your life. Whether it's just those things that pull at you every day, it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical payment, but there is an overhead. So in order to have some of those freedoms, evaluate what's in your overhead, see if it's important to you, and if it's not, try to get rid of it.
The incremental life creep is real, and I've experienced that.
I want to change topics one last time. Let's talk a little bit about Spar. So
Okay.
before we got on this call, you showed me something that you're working on. I assume is kind of a side project. Can you tell me more about it, who you're targeting with it, and where you would like for that to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So Spar was a passion project that I've seen in all sales, any sales industry that I've ever been in. Salespeople do not get the training and development that they need, especially in the automotive industry. And I think that managers are pulled in multiple different tasks. They have paperwork they have to do, so they don't train and develop salespeople. My training as a salesperson was you watched a couple product videos and then you went and you practiced with real customers. customers. If I'm an owner, I paid for that customer to come in, and now a salesperson who has no experience is practicing on that customer. And if you're not going to self-reflect, you're just burning, you're playing with real money, as I say. And it doesn't make sense that salespeople don't have this, right? Pilots have flight simulation. Baseball players have batting cages, as I show in the video that you watched. All these different, doctors have to go through constant, re-examination boards and everything like that. Salespeople don't have that. They just play with real money, and hopefully they can learn and develop and figure out where they went wrong. So I started talking to my friend in tech sales, and it was the same obstacle. No training, no development. His manager has 30 direct reports. He can't sit there and develop all of that with all the stuff that he has to do. And his manager would be like, "You're not doing a good job," but he wouldn't give specifics. So we started talking. We're like, there's got to be better training. And we saw there is not better training. So I just sought out AI is advancing. Right now, voice AI is finally at the stage where you can have real conversations with it. You can practice with it. So I went and developed an AI that can act the customer of any industry and play the role as the customer and give real life objections. So in my scenario, I'm targeting the automotive industry because that's just where I see the niche from. I think the B2B cycle is much quicker, 120 days or less to do a B2B close compared to the tech industry or one of the other different industries. And I know what salespeople need. I know what they need to practice. And from right now, I'm in testing trials. It's going well. I'm actually going to take away and rebuild the AI right now to make it even better. I found some great guys that I'm partnering with that have probably the most phenomenal AI I've ever experienced out of London. So shout out to Swifty AI. Because they're just phenomenal and just built their own LLM, which is far better than anything else in the industry. So I'm going to piggyback off of them and just kind of go back out and hit it hard and hopefully build the company up and just solve a niche. And I think the other obstacle that I've seen is I didn't even think this is a use case. If a salesperson is not, let's say it's slow, if they don't feel like they're getting developed, if they don't feel like they can win, they're going to get demotivated. But if they can sharpen their skills and practice their skills, they're much more inclined to stay. So I didn't even think of it as a potential to lower turnover, but managers have seen that it's already doing that.
As an entrepreneur, I need to be able to figure out and sell my own product before I can teach anybody else to sell it. Like, that's on me. That is a personal feeling. But I also know that people who operate organizations, they know it much better than someone who comes in, and they have got a lot more riding on it. As you had mentioned, a lot of salespeople are playing with real money that may not belong to them. Yeah, they're incentivized to make the sales so they'll make more money, but the actual cost of that lead, their customer acquisition cost, is not on them. They didn't have that $1,200 to get that person into the door to even begin that conversation. So they're not necessarily have the same motivations as someone as a GSM or someone who is incentivized by not only the completion of the sale, but also potentially a commission off the overall business. So it's very different to have someone who's coming in, especially low level or new, and not having those tools to really coach them up. I think that this has a great opportunity in the future. And I'm glad to see that this is something that you're working on.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you think as a salesperson, you control your own destiny. And one of the things that I've seen from a lot of tech salespeople is you don't get to control your own destiny. It's really based off the accounts that you get. And if you get good accounts, you're going to be extremely successful. But if you get bad accounts, you're just, there's no way to win. And if you take away the motivation from a salesperson, then they can't motivate themselves. There's nothing they can do. But if a motivated salesperson that thinks they can make money and be successful, they'll run through walls for you.
So one last thing that I like to do as part of my podcast is kind of give you 90 seconds to plug whatever you're passionate about right now. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. So obviously I want to say thank you to Swifty AI because these guys have taken me, they reached out much like you did for a call, and, they just took a liking to me, and they're well more technologically versed than I am. So I want to shout out to that. Also, big brother, big sister organization. I've been a big for quite a while. I love it. So anybody else, having a mentor in any capacity, especially as a young child, is extremely important, but carry that same mentorship for you as a professional all the way through life. And we can all learn and grow from each other. And I think that we need to have more conversations like this and take away these tokens of knowledge and then spread that with everybody else.
Absolutely. Well, Sheldon, I appreciate your time today.